Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the only podcast listened by Dostoevsky and Flannery O'Connor. I think Dostoevsky and Flannery O'Connor, I have this mental idea that they have tea in heaven because I think they're the same type of prophet.
I was just thinking about them drinking tea in heaven, but together. Were you thinking together or separate in their own?
Definitely together. They're in this chaste, flirtatious relationship because they're the same type of prophet. They're the prophet of like a terrible mysticism that people don't want to like deal with or look at. You know, it's kind of like I saw some images. Simple House was looking for Advent calendars because we did this Advent outreach. And one of the Advent calendars we considered giving away while we were meeting people in this public housing neighborhood had this beautiful like cartoon donkey over this like beautiful cartoon Jesus and this beautiful, you know, like manger. Very picturesque, very sweet, very Precious Moments-esque. By the way, in Missouri, there's something called the Precious Moments Chapel. It's been there for like 20, 30 years. The guy who made Precious Moments did like a Sistine Chapel of Precious Moments. You can get married there if you want. That's not a great thing, but just it does exist. It's something maybe you could drop by. It's in southern Missouri. All right. I think it's on an island in a lake with a little bridge that goes to it.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, very beautiful. Very sweet. Very precious. But I'm offended by this because like Jesus being born in like a homeless family that's living in a dirty stable and being born there and sat in, you know, manger and perhaps even just inches away from like an animal's mouth or something like that. You know what I mean? This is not like okay. Like this is like horrible. It's like beautiful. Because it's like the way God lives and works and wants to show that like it's like the crucifixion. It's not a gold crucifix shined up in the front of your church, very discreetly done with like covering all his private parts. It's like a naked man tortured to death with crusted blood on him. You know what I mean? It's like it's horrible and beautiful, right? And I think that Dostoevsky and Flannery O'Connor kind of get that that's what God does, you know, and a lot of people don't like going there in their mystical pursuits. All right. Anyway. But if you do go there, it helps you kind of love the poor in a way, because there's going to be a lot of kind of ugly beauty in a sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. On this episode, we are going to recap what we went over in the Simple House Missioner's Manual. We're going to go into the next section of the manual that deals with the problems that we laid out in the last podcast. Then we're going to go into some feedback we got from a seminarian. We're going to talk about some current events and kind of the interesting situation of Ireland, Poland, and Hungary. We'll talk about another current event, which is Disney and South Park and their little tit for tat, and JPII visiting Poland historically.
Not a current event.
Not a current event, but there's some interesting ideas that kind of have to do there. And if we have time, I will alienate our audience by telling them my opinions on shopping carts. Laura, do you have anything to add to this?
I don't. I just am anticipating the big reveal that you are not a good person at the end of this podcast.
Right. So you can discount everything I say earlier in the podcast, knowing that I'm not the type of person who thinks it's right to return your shopping cart. Yeah. And that probably just jaded everyone against me. But I do return my shopping cart a good part of the time, particularly if it's a mom and pop place. But all right, let's go into this. All right.
Let's get into this.
Recapping. Okay. In the Missioner's Manual, we kind of talked last time on the problem of self-deception. And that people aren't honest about even when they're happy. And that the fall has polluted us so far that it's gone down, not just in our conscious mind and the tricks it can play on us, and not just even in our subconscious, but actually down to the base level, the most basic, deep thing, which is the urges we feel. Even the urges to eat, sleep, and sex have been corrupted and are no longer trustworthy guides for us. That's kind of the setup to this next part. And by the way, two of the things that come out of this is like what Adam and Eve do immediately after the fall is they play hide and seek with God.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is insane.
Yeah, completely insane. Like, God loves you, which is intimidating, I guess. And you know that you can't really hide from the all-knowing, all-powerful being.
Ever omnipresent. Yeah.
Omnipresent, right? But you try anyway. Mm-hmm. And the way we kind of participate in original sin is we hide too, know, and we hide through either distracting ourselves from the important things in life, which the real source of our happiness being God. So it's this distraction strategy. And the other way would be like an intoxicating strategy, like creating goods that are not God. They could be intoxication of lust, intoxication of drugs, intoxication of power, and kind of creating this false thing there, right? And we also talked about in the last episode that all intoxications are wrong, but not all distractions. There is a certain amount of distraction that's just necessary in a healthy life. It's just when you bring the distraction to the point that you're escaping your responsibilities and escaping God that it's a problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what is, Laura, what is the solution to this problem?
Asceticism, which is one of the precepts of the church. So there's like very few things that the church requires of us. And like going to confession once a year, going to mass on Sundays, and that you follow the church's fasting and abstinence.
And there's also, I think, a minimum amount of taking of communion, like once a year or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's 5 precepts, but one of them is like a minimum of asceticism that you should practice. And the minimum is a minimum, and we encourage more here at A Simple House. And I think like a mature person, and then a mature person in growing in the faith will practice more asceticism than just like the, Lenten Fridays or whatever. But
so we're going to unpack that, because I feel like asceticism is not something talked about frequently. Like when we raise up young people in college and in the church, we tell them, go to the sacraments a lot, like do more than the minimum of the precept, like maybe go to daily mass as opposed to Sunday mass. But we don't tend to help them understand asceticism.
Yeah.
And when we do stuff in the church, sometimes it's kind of silly. It's like getting a bunch of high schoolers in a gymnasium for a rally, and then they're all like fasting, and then they have juice or something like this, And it's like, that's not really the idea of asceticism, is like something that you either achieve or some rally that you do. And the other confusion about asceticism that we should maybe get out of the way at the beginning is asceticism can kind of get misunderstood when we confuse it too much with penance. And penance, I think, has 2 understandings, one of which I find way more useful than the other. So one understanding of penance is that it is that which heals, that which like does the wrong, like tries to make up for the wrong and heal the wrong, right? Like if you sin against God and you go to confession, you're told to go pray, you're kind of doing that which is good to repair the relationship that was maybe harmed by the sin, right? Another understanding of penance is that you're somehow in this juridical situation where justice is lacking, and you've got to somehow like add to the scales of justice, right? And I don't think that's wrong. I just don't think it's a great attitude.
Yeah.
It somehow puts the person too in the center of the
like salvation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I think like in a way it's like when you have like a penance, it's like an action, that you can take. It's I think this is like a gift from God to man, because it's like we are physical and spiritual beings, and I think there's like something that feels more complete, like it's like you might feel sorry, right? But it's like you don't feel like you've made up for the thing. And so when you can take a physical action or like a tangible action for penance, it's more it opens up avenues of healing, is what I'm trying to say.
That sounds right. Yes. So once again, that focuses the idea on healing as opposed to some juridical action. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that this juridical action kind of comes from something that's not from the ancient church, but more from the Middle Ages, where it's like Christ died primarily to balance some injustice scale. Like sin was on one side, Christ sacrificed on the other, and the infinite sin and the infinite sacrifice like somehow make things right? And then we have this one line from St. Paul, which is like sufferings make up for what is lacking in the suffering of Christ. And we build a whole theology on that of like giving away suffering to other people and for virtue and basically helping other people through your suffering, etc. And once again, I don't think that theology is necessarily wrong. I find it not the right focus and much more a minor strain than a major strain. If someone says, hey, I understand the Catholic view on suffering because I understand we can give suffering to others, I'd be like, you do not understand it. Like you understand a teaching that has been really emphasized by some people, but I do not think that is the primary source, the reason for suffering or the primary way that you are made better by suffering. By the way, we're a little bit off track, but I think the main reason for suffering is to turn you around.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. You sin, you experience aridity, you experience suffering. It is meant to encourage you to turn back to God. Kind of the way like a horse gets spurred if it's off course or something like that, kind of like with the bridle or whatever turned back. And when people like act like they're suffering and it's from God, I think there's a weird spirituality there often, that they're not acting like, oh, maybe I need to reevaluate. Maybe God's trying to get me to do something. They actually think, no, I'm actually perfectly fine. I'm just being given suffering by God as some great gift because I need to, work through it, just suffer
I do think like there's like, when you see a good person suffering with a painful disease that maybe is terminal, they're still like working out their relationship with God, a lot of times.
Right. Like the suffering from like cancer is not probably have anything to do with your sin. Right.
Right. But there's a purification in it, even right. Like
mm-hmm. Suffering can be very purifying when it's not your fault. That actually, once again, is not about this juridical understanding, but is about like purifying your love for God. Right.
Yeah.
And then I think everyone who listens to this will have some thought about the dark night of the soul type suffering. And the thing that irritates me to death about this is if you read the dark night of the soul stuff, it's like that doesn't really apply to almost anyone except someone who's so extremely advanced on the road to perfection.
Yeah, like Mother Teresa.
Yeah. Right. Or like there's nothing more normal yet more off track than like having the young enthusiastic college student start reading The Interior Castle right after they start taking their faith seriously. And it's like, can you just read the introduction where it says that this is not really the work for you? You know? Like you're not supposed to spend your first, years taking the spiritual life seriously, trying to figure out which room of the interior castle you're in. Yes.
Yeah.
But all right, let's get back to this. Let's talk about asceticism very broadly. So asceticism is this like kind of taking yourself out of the intoxication and the distraction. Mm-hmm. And it has multiple roles, only one of which is fasting. Like I think that the silence, the stillness is like an asceticism. The kind of keeping watch with Christ is an asceticism. And all of the goal here is to break your heart, to create humility. And through this comes like self-knowledge and comes the ability to start doing that which we're called to, which is to actually re-educate our passions and start healing that fall that is within us. It's not enough to just like become a very powerful willpower person who can contradict their passions. You actually need to kind of like, this is a modern way of saying it, but like reprogram yourself a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like reflect on these passions, understand why it's wrong, and call yourself deeper to love and heal them. You're actually called to heal them, and you can't do it yourself. It's not it's like a God project with you and the Holy Spirit dwelling in you doing this. And I think that in Simple House, our kind of role is like, you need to have a certain amount of silence. You need to have a certain amount of asceticism, which we do through like voluntary poverty. And you need to have a certain amount of kind of discipline, which is like, we kind of tie discipline to be like, pray even when you don't want to, go to the sacraments even when you don't want to, kind of work through that, and you'll start to want to, and you'll start to heal through that, with the ultimate goal being this kind of like natural and supernatural activity of like recollection, meditation, contemplation, And I think contemplation is best thought of as like infused contemplation, which means like a supernatural contemplation where you can't quite tell which thoughts are God's and where God's leading you. And
it's given, it's fully given. It's not something you can do. Like you can kind of put yourself in a place to receive it, but you can't, it's given.
Well, I think the way I think it works most of the time is you kind of put yourself on the job of meditation. You put yourself in the place to receive it, and then you start working on things through meditation, and then God starts joining the conversation, potentially. Yeah. And you can never quite tell what's from you and what's from God, but it's pretty clear that's not just you, And this is where like the kind of like work of the Christian is, I think. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about fasting for a second, because we usually don't cover this too much in Simple House training, but we cover it at Simple House Retreat because we go on this silent retreat each year for most of a week at a Benedictine monastery. And the fasting that the early church thought was appropriate was not to fast for days, not to fast but at most fast for 24 hours, but it was to eat at the 9th hour. And the 9th hour is the 9th hour after you wake up, which is typically in the early church thought to be about like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? This is the way the Desert Fathers saw it.
6 o'clock when you wake up, 9th hour is 3 o'clock. Yeah.
So first lesson there, start waking up at 6 o'clock. At the 9th hour, you break the fast, right? And before that, you have this 9 hours of fasting in the morning, and what the early church, or what the Desert Fathers and Cashin and these early spiritual writers are talking about, is they start talking about the 7 deadly sins, but they're actually talking about the 8 deadly sins. There's actually an 8th sin that got dropped off the list. And the 8th sin was the noonday devil, which maybe is not so much a sin as it is a temptation.
Is that acedia? Is that the same thing?
It's acedia. Yeah. It's the Duke Blue Devils. The Blue Devil's the noonday devil.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's the devil that kind of gets you and is like, what is the point? Why are you doing this? This is really not worthwhile. It's not the devil that tempts you to like have lust or some other thing, but it's kind of this devil that's just kind of torturing you about what's up with this, right? And what asceticism is supposed to do is actually get your biological hunger going to where you're on edge, right? Almost like if you were a hunter-gatherer, you'd be like, I think I need to go gather right now. What's going on here? Is there an animal around? I gotta go kill it. It's kind of gets you this desire, this edgy desire. And if you're doing Christian asceticism, the idea is to take that edgy desire and to keep focusing it back towards God. And that becomes like a great desire of prayer. It's work, but it's like you're always like taking this like kind of natural discomfort and bringing it back towards God to make it a desire for God and asking God about it. And when you do this, like first this 9-hour fast, you almost have to have kind of some rules about it, because one of the normal trip ups here is that you just all day long wonder, should I eat now? Is this working? Should I eat now? Is this working?
Yeah.
And you have to like shut out that idea or you can't get very far. So you almost have to say, I'm going to eat at 3. It's going to be great. It'd be awesome. Meal at 3 o'clock. And I'm just dedicated until then. And I'm going to struggle through all these desires, and it's not about like a eating disorder where you have like an obsession where it's like, I want to do, or like, where you're like either proud of doing it or guilt of doing it. It can't be going in that direction. And it also can't be like the asceticism of a marathon runner who's like very secular, who's like doing it to become like a more awesome person or to prove something. Its only purpose is to make you more dependent on God. So if you are a wimp and you're listening to us now and you're a wimp, you can get more out of asceticism than if you're like a tough thug, right?
Yeah.
Because you will go to God faster and quicker and be more dependent on him and get more out of that prayer because you're a wimp. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a toughie, you can actually get messed up with asceticism. If you're the type of person who'd run marathons,
just for fun.
Yeah, just for fun. It's harder for you to use asceticism well because you kind of like the self-deprivation.
Right.
Right. And that's not laudable in the spiritual sense,
It's like the point is, growing closer to God, but then all along you're kind of getting some self-knowledge about yourself too. And I think this is coming both from like actually doing the physical thing that is not comfortable, and seeing like who you are in that, but then also clearing the kind of clutter a little bit to let God be able to communicate with you. So I think there's kind of like a double.
And part of that clearing of the clutter is, what are you going to feed yourself while you're going through this?
Hey, Ben the editor here. Quick note, this should be the last episode in a while where Clark's audio has a weird hiccup, which affects his audio quality for the rest of the episode. So we are so sorry. We think we have it fixed for future episodes. Apologies for that, but great content coming forward.
And I think you want to feed yourself just the most basic, simple teachings of the church.
Yeah, I think it's like Catherine Doherty's Poustinia, the Madonna House Poustinia is it's just like simple room with like bread and the Bible,
Right.
Yeah.
And I think people find the Bible frustrating, similar to this talk we had a while back about Islamic fundamentalism and how it's difficult to be a Christian fundamentalist. The Bible is like confusing and contradictory, but it's full of wisdom at all times. It's the word of God. And it's just hard. People want something to be more ideological than the Bible is. And that's not where the growth is.
Yeah. I heard this seminary formator. I don't remember if this was in person, if this was on YouTube, whatever, but saying that he was noticing that the young, like eager seminarians, like every year were just reading, bringing more and more reading material into the chapel for their kind of like quiet meditation time. And that this wasn't necessarily a good thing. And I think that it's like, we are back to Adam and Eve. Like, it's like painful for some reason to stand naked before God, and to sort of deal with the omnipresence of God, and so we want to fill up with all these other things. And in the case of this seminary formator, he's saying, even the spiritual reading is like a distraction,
Right. This is like the thing in the Old Testament that comes out over and over again is, you put it right about standing naked before God. It's about this idea of like, no one can look upon the face of God and live.
Yeah.
By the way, that's also contradicting the Bible, because it also says Moses spoke face to face with God. But this
his
idea,
hair turned white. Yeah.
What did you just say?
His hair turned white.
Yeah, and his face glowed so bad that people couldn't look at his face after he looked at God's face. He had to wear a veil. But it's also like, Elijah in the wilderness. I hope I got the right name there. When God comes by and all these things, but he finally comes by more like in a whisper.
Yeah.
And
on the mountain. He's in the mountain. Yeah.
Right. He's in the cave of the mountain, I believe. And it has to do with like something about God burns away in you.
Yeah.
All your false selves, all the little lies you're telling yourself. Right. I saw a great book written by George Bernanos. He's the Diary of a Country Priest guy. It was a little essay. And he said that like in the final judgment, God is going to look like an infant. Like a terrible infant. It's just as pure as a baby. Just sat there with a baby face.
Yeah.
And it'll be the baby Jesus at the final judgment, basically. And when you go, well, the reason why I had to do this to my spouse, or I had to do this other thing at work that wasn't quite right, it was because of this and this and this. And the longer you explain it to the infant Jesus, the more the infant Jesus is going to look at you with his nice big wide eyes. And you're just going to know, I'm an idiot. Yeah. I'm just full 4-letter word right here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I have to quit lying to myself, and I have to just take what this is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the real, like, coming to God. And this is also like this idea of like, it's not about you doing stuff. Like this idea of like you producing grace is a trip up in the faith. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, if you even view the sacraments this way, you're actually tripping. It's not that the sacraments are a tool to gain faith, and there are something you could do to get grace. I just said faith, I meant grace. But like a way to think about it would be like if you're the parent and your kid shows up at 5 at the dining room table and says, I'm coming here because you have to feed me if I'm here. You know what I mean? It's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
You know, like, no, we're going to have a great meal. We're going to be a family. We're going to do this. But you're not doing it like transactionally or demandingly or expectantly in that way. It has to be a different idea.
Yeah, I think like an interesting thing is like, you know, who do you light the candle for at church? Like, are you lighting it for God? Because God can do a better job with the smoke of the candle, you know, in granting your, I was going to say wish, your prayer.
No, good point though. Yeah. Wish, yeah. That's an interest. I'm still trying to figure out what you mean by that, because that's interesting. Like, are you lighting it for yourself or for God? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like it's like the candle but why am I saying that? No, the candle is for you. You do this like physical thing for yourself, like so that you can more fully give it to God, you know? Right. Like it's a thing that helps to more fully give it to God, because God does not need you to light a candle. And there's like all these, you're taking an action, you see the smoke rising, and it's like your prayer is rising up to God. But it's like all these things for your senses and your...
Right. And it's like when you see these old novenas that are usually pre-Vatican II about do this, it's the most efficacious prayer. It's almost like, hey, do this and you'll get God to do something. And it's like, no. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, this is a good novena if it renders your heart to God, and it's not a good novena if it doesn't. And
it's about setting your disposition right. Right. Yeah.
Right. So all of this makes humility possible, and all of this is necessary. Like, there's something where, like, if you try to be detached, you're never going to know if you're detached from your wealth or your belongings unless you lose or give up your wealth and belongings. And I'm not telling you parents out there to give up your wealth and belongings. That would be crazy. But sometimes when you're young, you can, you know, or if you're religious, you do, right? You have to give up that freedom, right? It can't just be a mental exercise. It needs to be actual. It's like, you also never know if you're humble until you're humiliated. Yeah. Right? Humiliation can be a way to learn humility. It's not enough to just like do some little mental exercise in your proud self and then pat yourself on the back that you gained humility. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think it's like a person that is being humiliated in sort of by circumstances of life or a mess they've created, like maybe doesn't need to hit fasting so hard at that point of their life.
That's true. You're getting your asceticism given to you, not optionally, you know? Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of also, that's true that in general, like this idea of like working on yourself and like working through your temptations and working on your passions, you don't do that in the heat of the moment. You do that on a retreat, or you do that when you have time and when you're not in the midst of the passion. Yeah. You know? And if you're in the midst of a great trial, usually don't go hit asceticism real hard. The trial is the asceticism.
Like you don't need, right.
I was going to talk about real humility versus kind of like a heretical humility. Something that's fairly common is for a Christian to just realize how terrible they are. And I say realize not in the real sense. They like start thinking that they're terrible. And oftentimes the thing they're thinking of is like some stupid thing they said in middle school. And it's amazing how long we remember these dumb things we say. Yeah. Ugh. And oftentimes it's not even a sin. It's just like a faux pas. Yeah. Right. And you start thinking about how bad you are. And you're just saying, I'm so bad, I'm so bad, I'm so bad. Or I'm so evil, I'm so evil, or I'm so sinful. And like, particularly if you're saying like, I'm so bad, I'm so bad, I'm so bad. That's a heresy. And if you're saying it over and over again, you've made a heresy a mantra. You basically have a heresy that you've created into this formative mantra for yourself. This is terrible. You know, like this is making you into a heretic, essentially. What you need to do is have real humility, which is kind of understanding properly who we are in the face of God. And it's not like hating yourself. It's actually loving the gift of self that God gave you. I mean, the most basic thing to be thankful for is being. You know, that's the thing that's just like when everything else is taken away, the being is just so amazing, you know, that God gave us.
Yeah. Until I started visiting like our ministry families, I didn't ever hear people give thanks to God for waking them up in the morning. You know, it was like a very like common thing that people ask. It's a very common thing people ask, you know, when we pray at the end of ministry visits, what do people want to pray for? Very common is, you know, thanks for waking me up this morning. I don't know if did you hear that?
No, that's true. Yeah. And I think I just wanted you to kind of go on that because it's so surprising. And one of the things that's very surprising in our ministry is like, if you're like in a middle class or up situation, asking people to pray is awkward. Yes. When you're in with the poor, if you don't ask them if they want to pray, they will ask you.
Yeah.
And they will frequently wake people up who are sleeping and get them to join the prayer. Yeah. And it's just an interesting, like when we go out to do ministry with people for the first time, even if they're seminarians, I have to tell them this. I have to say, look, this sounds awkward. It's not awkward.
Yeah. I mean, I've had walked into a room where like a drug deal was transpiring and been like, oh, never mind, see you later. And the guys have been like, aren't you a church person? Aren't you going to pray for us? And you're like, okay, yes, I am.
We had this thing happen on our last outreach. We had a bunch of seminarians from Conception Abbey here. And in the public housing neighborhood we were going into, there's a lot of African, Somali, Islamic, like refugees, right? And it's kind of interesting when you're a Catholic missionary knocking on doors randomly and you meet, you know, a bunch of Islamic people. And then what do? It's like, well, do you want an Advent calendar? You know? Yeah. And then do you want to pray? Well, one of the seminarians said, well, how do we pray with the Islamic people? And I was kind of like, usually just don't. Like, that's not usually the move there, right? And I kind of, and then we do this funny thing where before we go out, we do a little bit of role playing. We have people knock on a door. And so when this seminarian came up to the door and he knocked on it, I role play whoever's behind the door. And I'm like, I'm Islamic. And he was like, okay, good to meet you. And he left and he didn't pray with me. But then when he came back from the outreach, he goes, Clark, I prayed with an Islamic person. Because an old woman who didn't even speak the language wanted to pray with them. And so they just did a Christian prayer with this woman. And she was like, yes. And it was just beautiful because that was kind of like what his desire was when he went out. And I basically told him there's not really a good way to do that. And then he just did it and it was great. So.
Yeah, I think you have like a lot of Islamic refugees in Kansas City, and the Islamic people that we might encounter in DC would be like Nation of Islam, like kind of people that converted. And they typically do want to pray. And I think I would just say a prayer to God the Father, and people like that.
Well, and this is just something for people to know about poverty in America. So a place like DC with an extremely high cost of living, all the social services are kind of getting sucked up by citizens. You know what I mean? So all the public housing, there's almost zero turnover. No one ever moves out. They're all like mostly Americans in the public housing, right? But when you go to a place like Kansas City with a low cost of living, public housing has turnover. Like people literally go there as a safety net and then get out, you know? Yeah. And we also end up with refugees who use our public housing because it's available, you know, where there's none available in DC, so they don't use it. And therefore we get more Islamic refugees and groups like that coming in, particularly Somalia seems like the big one around here. And so the Islam you see in DC is what native Islamic people often call prison Islam, which is Nation Islam or whatever. And it's just a different, very flair. It's like they very much get that we're coming from almost like a Protestant Christian nation, and they kind of respect that, I think, to a certain degree. Whereas like to the Somali Islam, it's like totally foreign. It feels like. Yeah. But
there are some refugees more like in PG County and stuff. But yeah, in DC, in the city, it's not.
Right. Well, I would meet
some pocket I don't know about.
I would meet some Egyptians and immigrants who were Islamic in DC, but they didn't feel like refugees. They didn't feel like they came over on that type of visa. They didn't come out of a refugee camp, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just kind of an interesting way poverty works. I think people need to know. But
yeah. I wanted to go back to this idea of these like middle school memories that torture you, you know?
Yeah.
I think just very practically, like people should ask God to lift that kind of tormenting thing, you know, because it's like a lie.
I don't think God wants to. And the reason why is I think what we're doing there is we think that being good is being cool. Like, because oftentimes we're not actually sinning in these stupid middle school memories. We're just being like dorks. And it's like God isn't looking to hang out with cool people.
I'm not saying like take away the memory. I think some of these things that torment us were actually sin. And it's like we can't get over God's mercy. And some of it is like social faux pas. And we can't get over God's mercy. You know, like
I wonder if I thought Jordan Peterson said something pretty insightful once where he talked about if you were abused in the past, sometimes that haunts you for a very long time. And he says sometimes it's haunting you because you're still trying to learn from it. You're still trying to figure out how to protect yourself or like what you need to do and like where you went wrong and what, you know, and I know if you're abused, it's not you that did wrong, but there's still things that you're trying to figure out there, you know? Yeah. And I think sometimes if it's not like a faux pas, like it's not like some stupid thing you said, but like it's actually a sin. I sometimes think that is, you could ask God to just make you forget it, but I actually think that's like the thing you could be reflecting on in your meditation and kind of contemplate through.
I'm not saying to ask God to help you forget it. I'm talking about the anxiety, the torment, the punishing of yourself or whatever it is. Like,
yeah, that's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And I think that personally, the only thing I have found that works, even with all, like, I is just asking God to take the torment away because it's telling me a lie that I'm not loved, you know, by God.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just saying that because I feel like that's not said out loud anyway.
Right. Good.
Yeah.
Let's recap. Let's put a capstone on this conversation a little bit and we'll move on to the next topic. But the opposite of this like ascetical recollected life is kind of a romantic life or a life where you just kind of do what your impulses tell you to do. And this is not good, right? It's not that romance is wrong, but this like romanticism of that if only you could just listen to your deepest impulses, you'll somehow be living this great free life. That's a lie.
That man is spoiled by society. Man is born pure and spoiled by society.
Right. And really, those impulses that are deep down in you can't be trusted. And it's just it's a sad fact. You know, if you sex, eat, and sleep, even without society, as much whenever you feel like it, you'll end up in a very bad place.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think, and there's like a kind of idea that like repression is bad, you know, but it's like if you so we think we need to like get things out or else, you know, we're repressing and it's bad. But like overeating and oversexing, you know, and kind of like satisfying kind of unhealthy, lustful urges or whatever, like those, or letting your anger, did I already say this? Like letting your anger go unfettered, like those things don't satisfy, you know, they make you more lustful, more angry, more prone to overeat.
And you see this all the time. Like, it's always interesting when people like get the death penalty and then the victim's family comes out and say like, you know, that wasn't as satisfying as I thought it was going to be to watch that person die. You know, and you're like, oh, okay. You know, but really here, it's like, so just to be clear about what I think the Christian way is, repression is a good strategy as a short-term strategy.
As a short-term,
It is a terrible long-term strategy. When you're in your moment of doing better, you work through the angry thoughts. You work through the lustful thoughts. You work through these things and start educating your passions, you know?
To have healthy passions, to have like healthy sexuality, to have, you know, like all of your passions sort of ordered healthily are like...
Right. And this is
put
not...
you in a right place with God. Yeah.
This is not Stoicism. This is not the education of the passions the same way a Stoic would. This is actually living with the Holy Spirit. This is, you're going to do kind of the work of the Stoic, but you're also allowing the Holy Spirit to dwell within you and live cooperatively, or there's no word for it, but it enlivens with your life with the Holy Spirit. And that's what transcends this reality into letting you be perfect again.
Yeah. You know what I thought was like really interesting is this idea that Sister Ann Cattery said when she was on her podcast about like when she's brushing her teeth, she's not going through the to-do list, you know? And so it's like she's like working on directing her thoughts like at every moment of the day, you know? And I was like, well, that sounds exhausting. And she thought actually it's freeing, you know? And it's like when you're brushing your teeth and you are like there with the thing that God has given you to do at the moment.
Yeah. You know, a piece of advice that was given to me that I think is probably right, but I can't say for 100% it's right, but I found it kind of helpful is when you do this, like say you decide every morning you're going to pray for half an hour or something, and you're just going to pray in silence or force yourself to recollect, in a sense, do like a discipline on yourself to recollect. You might start planning your day, and you almost can't even help it half the time. It's like your mind keeps going to plan your day. And I have found the advice I got was perhaps God wants to plan your day with you. And I found some freedom in like allowing a few plannings to happen. And then you're done with it. Now you're back to a different meditation. You know?
Yeah, I think it's like, I feel like that's a thing that can be freeing or a cop out. But because I think when I'm like wanting to sit down and plan my day, you know, if I'm like trying to sit down and pray, then I'll just bring my planner and be like, okay, God, let me get it all out. Help me here. And now I'm going to do the, you know, Bible reading that I have kind of put myself on the plan of doing, you know, and I like that. It's like a very nice way to start the morning sometimes, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a statement by St. Francis de Sales that I think plays on a lot of what we said, where it's like, I would rather a short prayer with a good resolution than a very long prayer with no resolution. Like these prayers are to put you in the presence of God and to break your heart and to give you like a way forward to live with God in life. And it doesn't matter if you said 5 rosaries or said half a rosary. Yeah. You know, the only thing that's like deceptive in all that is you kind of have to create hoops for yourself to jump through and force yourself to go places you don't want to go, you know? So you can't just like cop out and say, well, half a rosary is good enough for today, you know? But it is true. It could be good enough for today.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like you could be praying the rosary and sort of get on a fruitful meditation or thought and you abandon the rest of the rosary, you know, and sometimes you can be praying the rosary and get distracted by other stuff. And then you got to get yourself back on the plan, you know, and I think like learning to discern those things is good. Yeah.
This is great. And let's move on from Simple House formation so we actually get through everything we said we're going to get through. All right. Seminarian, friend of the ministry, gave us some great feedback. One of the questions the seminarian asked was that in seminary, they're encouraging the seminarians to create a prayerful parish or to be a parish that prays. And he's asking, what would we suggest a young priest do who's to make a parish that prays? Do you have any thoughts on this, Laura?
Can I quote the phrase of the assignment he was given?
Yes.
He's got to write a detailed plan of action for how they will cultivate a spirit of mysticism in their future parish. The idea is that the parish should be a school of prayer. They have to, since a lot of people in the church don't know how to have like deep interior lives, they need to figure out how to get people away from communion with sin to communion with the Trinity. I'm
glad you read that, because I had remembered it as a much more basic thing than the depth you put into that, which is good.
Yeah.
When I first read the assignment, I thought, what is the teacher trying to get at here? Like, is the teacher trying to get like a certain like level of worship at the parish, like more acts of public piety? Or is the professor got some other idea there that they're going for, you know? My instinct is the same instinct we have at Simple House, which is that we are trying to give people a spirituality. We are trying to promote the very most simple parts of Christianity that have always been present. And if they use that and become a charismatic Catholic, or become like a traditionalist, or become whatever they want to, or really get into some saint spirituality, that's kind of okay. But what we're going to promote is not any of those other like kind of like spiritualities, but only the most basic premises, you know?
Yeah. And I think we're trying to make a space where it's possible to grow in the spiritual life. Like it's like less a plan and more a space with the basics.
Right. With the idea that we don't actually, I'm kind of anti-formation. And what I mean by that is like formation sometimes is like you have a goal that you're trying to bring someone or make someone into, right?
Yeah.
I think the idea I have is that all these people need to blossom into like a mostly unique relationship with God, you know, and there's certain aspects of that I know are real, like you don't sin, you take sacraments, you're obedient to the Catholic Church. But like there's such a variety of saints. And I'm sure there's saints that I have not imagined or understand. And any person who sits in front of me, particularly like a 22-year-old person kind of early in their life, I have no idea. I can't plan what they're going to become, and I shouldn't even want to try to control that. My goal is to give them some basic tools that'll help them no matter what type of saint they're becoming.
Yeah. You know? And I think you'll see, like, this is my impression. There's not like a typical Simple House volunteer that we graduate, you know? It's different personalities, different interests, different ways people like to express their kind of spiritual lives and whatever.
Right. And I think that like part of our goal is to listen to the person and hear what they want, you know? And both secularly, kind of like when I say secularly, I just mean like something that's not overtly religious. Like we got a guy at Simple House right now who likes storm chasing. Like during college, he used to like chase tornadoes in a car, you know, with buddies. Like I want him to use that passion for weather and like do something with it. It'd be great. Can I help you with that? Like, what can we do to help you realize this? You know, could you in any way make this part of your future career? Could we do anything now to set you up to do that? Right. But the same idea with your spirituality, like if you have a special interest in monasticism or the Missionaries of Charity, well, what if you take off half a week or a week at Simple House and go live with them for a week? You know, like, why not? Yeah. When else in life can you do that? Let's go. Let's do it, you know? And to tell them to not just say these things like there's some real weird future thing they might do someday, but like, no, now, go, bye. You know? Yeah. Essentially kind of pushing them to like bloom the way they feel called to bloom. You know, and I think that this is a wisdom I've heard a priest say once. He said, like, push what moves. I think military guys sometimes say that too. But it's like, if you get sent to a parish as a priest, my suggestion would not be to come in with the idea of what you're going to make the parish into. My idea would be that you come in and I'm going to say this story that my dad was in this funny situation where he worked for this big corporation that was owned by Ross Perot. That's irrelevant, but it's just funny that he worked for Ross Perot. And they would buy little companies, and sometimes he'd have to go manage this new thing they bought, And one time they bought the guys who made WordPerfect, the old famous word processor.
People might not know what WordPerfect is, but I was thinking about this. Like, WordPerfect is to Microsoft Word what Microsoft Word is to Google
Docs. Yeah. WordPerfect was basically ripped off by Microsoft Word, and it was still more popular amongst like real writers and like lawyers who prefer WordPerfect to Microsoft Word. I don't know. It might still exist even. I'm not sure.
I don't know. But I grew up on WordPerfect anyway.
Anyway, these WordPerfect guys, if I got the story right, they're all like Mormon guys who live in Utah, right? So like my dad was like, hey, Clark, I think I was in college at the time. Do you want to come with me? We'll go to Utah. I got to do a couple of days of work with these guys, and then we'll go skiing. And I'm like, well, yes, that'd be awesome, right? So, but it means that 2 days of my vacation, I'm just sitting in this like the boardroom all day while my dad worked and I tried to do some college stuff or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I remember what my dad did there was all day long for 2 days, he met with everybody in that organization for like an hour. Right. Wow. And I have no idea. Can you only imagine what that was going on? I don't think he was talking to them. I think they were talking to him. They were like, yeah, here's the issue, or here's what I think should happen, or here's my dream, or here's whatever. Right. And the people there, I remember sitting in that conference room, they'd be like, is he still meeting? This is amazing that he's still listening to all these people after like 2 days. I kind of think that's probably the right move for a parish priest. Mm-hmm. Like go in and just, have an hour meeting as long as your stamina goes, with like every major person, who works for the parish or is seriously involved, and listen to them all out. And then based on that, kind of push what moves, you know what I mean? And enable this parish to succeed. And if you have this attitude, you might have one parish that kind of goes one direction and another parish that goes another direction, just depending on like what, in a sense, the people in the parish are like being called to and blooming to, Yeah. It also makes me think that the parish priest is like, he's a pastor, he's a shepherd, but it's like Christ is the real shepherd, and we're not always sure where he's going.
Yeah.
He's like leading the way, and these parish priests are running around making sure none of us just totally fall off.
Right. And I think it's like that it is, the way that you're trying to bring people to, rather than like this specific end. And you said this yesterday when we were discussing this. It's like you can't really begin to imagine what this parish could be because you just,
right.
Yeah.
I was sitting in my parish and some people were talking about this big evangelization plan that another parish was launching. And I heard the evangelization plan, and I just thought, boy, that's annoying. I think it's wrong-headed in a few ways. And then I just kind of stopped myself because I was like, I'm not even going to argue against this because this is just going to fail and it's going to be okay. I've seen enough evangelization plans go nowhere that, like, who cares? And I've also seen things bloom that had almost no plan, So anyway, my sense would be give your parish the basics. Like spirituality, like scripture, love, all these things, right? And then kind of let them, like, kind of cooperate with them to kind of go where they're being called, in a sense.
Yeah. I think, also, like, it's like you do want a prayerful parish, right? Like, that's right. Like a beautiful thing, but to try to, like, force it into a particular vision is. Another feedback from this seminarian was that he wanted to know, kind of hear about our mentality regarding prayer as a source of ministry, and what we teach our missionaries about this. And I like this point that he makes, that receiving from Christ can sometimes be ignored when we get the heroic notion that we are sacrificing ourselves for another. I do think this is like a thing that our missionary, the second part, like our missionaries can struggle into getting it, like, oh, all these people need groceries and I'm going to like burn myself out delivering every last grocery, and that's something we don't want our missionaries doing. And we don't think that burnout is a natural consequence of our work, and like prayer is the source of ministry and of love. And we also want, like with the recollection, it's like for developing ourselves, but we also want people, like our missionaries a lot of time are going into like crazy crisis situations. And we want them to be like the recollected person in the room. So
I think that everything we said at the beginning of the podcast about kind of like, hey, we have this problem of lying to ourselves, and here's how you kind of get more into an honest state through asceticism and recollection. It's like, and even then you can't trust yourself. Yeah. And even then you need friends. You need spiritual friends who are trying to do the same work you're trying to do at some level. And you need, and not just a spiritual director, you actually need the friends. Yeah. I would never trust a director enough to like just dictate to you what's right and wrong with all this stuff. You actually need like these co-people on the journey who are trying to keep their compass pointed north, And I think the secret sauce at Simple House has always been the discernment of the group. Yeah. Because, and the group's very small. Usually this discernment's like 4 people. But if you're becoming like the grocery hero of the poor, these other 3 people are going to put you in your place. Yeah. So if we've got everyone making some attempt at living a recollected life, and then we all get together in the morning and talk about what we're going to do that day or an issue that came up in ministry, it's that group that's going to keep you from, the stupidest things, And I have met people who serve the poor on their own, kind of as a cowboy, which I consider us kind of a cowboy ministry, but it's this group discernment that keeps us from getting too crazy. But like, if you meet someone who's just like a lone ranger, I've met people who had very bad intentions who did that, and I've met people who I thought were better than me who did that, and who had better intentions than me doing that. And all of them came to bad ends, even the ones with the best intentions and most purity, And I think they came to bad ends because it's just too much to discern on your own, to be that lone ranger who can, out there helping everybody and blah, 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 and just doing what you feel called to. You almost need the spiritual friendship to keep you on track. Yeah. So I think that's how we kind of keep on track. And if you're a parish priest, you're in kind of a strange situation. I know parish priests fellowship with each other. So that's one way to kind of have that spiritual friendship. I would also have a team of people at the top of the parish who I trusted, who I liked, and maybe that means you have to replace some people at the parish, but not because they're so bad, but just they're not the right friends for you to help you run this parish. You almost need somebody who you can go in and say, hey, I had this great idea. We're going to open the parish up every night to let the homeless sleep there. And then you need your 3 people to be like, let's talk this through, Father. What you don't want is everyone respecting Father so much they don't object to these things,
Yep. Yeah. Different people can recognize different things in different people. And like, there's been times when one volunteer recognized that something was truly an emergency that one person didn't see, or another volunteer recognized that, nope, this in fact is not an emergency, Yep. And so, but we're not at a Simple House going to sacrifice like our spiritual lives to go deal with all the emergencies or whatever. It's like we're, we have kind of the daily mass requirement, liturgy of the hours requirement, and the expectation that people are, filling themselves up with prayer in addition to those things every day.
Yep. So, without that, then this whole like discernment process won't work. Everybody's got to be putting in their work. All right, let's get on to some current events. So there's this interesting thing happening in Europe right now, where there's certain countries in Europe, Ireland, Poland, and Hungary, who are kind of revolting against mass immigration in a way, and they feel different than some of the other countries. Like Ireland just had some protests and some little kind of riot protests against immigration after an immigrant killed some Irish people. And it's interesting because the narrative that makes you tell this nation that they have to just keep taking in more and more people is usually a narrative of like, hey, this is almost like a reparation or like a they use kind of white guilt ideas where it's like, hey, you guys were colonizers. Now you have to let the people you colonized come and colonize you, you know? Yeah. And what's interesting about these nations of Ireland, Poland, and Hungary is none of them were colonizers. And like the ethos of Ireland was, let's kick these darn English out so we can have Ireland for the Irish. Yeah. You know? And there's literally people in Ireland right now who spilt blood in that struggle. And now they're being told to like give away the country to a new crew, you know? And they're like, hell no. You know, and Hungary and Poland have kind of had the same message. And Hungary and Poland also were people who were colonized very ruthlessly by Ottomans and by everyone else, you know. They've had hundreds of years of like having a struggle, you know, and they don't, all these these kind of woke arguments don't work in those nations. And it's just interesting to see them like have a different sensibility to that. You know?
Yeah.
I don't understand how immigration works in the EU, because I don't understand how Hungary's been able to prevent immigration, even though they have open borders with the EU. So I know that there's a movement in Europe to like the Netherlands elected a guy who wants to close borders and maybe leave the EU, you know? So it's going to be interesting to see the future of the EU with all this.
I think like every country, it's, you know, you'll have Germany say like, we can take this many, you know, refugees, or like, you know, like every country is at some level determining like, this is the number, you know, we can.
So there must be like legal and illegal refugees, and then they determine the amount of legal they want. But then there's also, how do you crack down on just people who wander in, you know? So they must have different policies related to that. But I think that's interesting.
I heard someone talking about England, and it's like England, which colonized a whole bunch of places, still doesn't have like the same slavery legacy, you know, that you might say that US has, and that a lot of the racism talk in England has been sort of adopted from the US. And so, you know, I guess like just an interesting thing is either taking on a story that's not yours or a story that's not yours being forced upon you. It's kind of interesting.
I was in grad school in an interesting situation where we were all sitting in this like PhD kind of lounge, and there's a lot of Indians and there's a lot of Romanians, right? And the Indians were having a debate amongst themselves, kind of fiery, about whether or not it was a net good that England had colonized India, whether or not India is better off today due to English colonization or not, right? And it was kind of heated.
That's a question in other places too,
Right, that is a question in other places, particularly with England, just because they weren't the worst, most colonial power, right?
Yeah.
And in that debate, like, it was also interesting because like you kind of knew that they probably wouldn't be at this grad school right now if England hadn't. Because like it was partly because their education system was in English that they did so well in grad school, you know. But the Romanians were getting pissed. And the Romanians were like, we weren't colonized by England. We were colonized by the Ottoman Empire. For like 500 years, everything we built was taken, and there's no structure from that whole period of Ottoman rule. That like, there's no like, you know, like Calcutta still has like English parts of town that are kind of interesting and nice architectural parts. And the Romanians like, we have nothing to show for this, you know? And it was just interesting to see that reaction. Moving right along, Disney and South Park. All right. These episodes are released at a delay, but there was a South Park episode that had two themes that was very powerful and went viral. And it was that Disney has been ruined by making everything gay and lame. And they've destroyed Star Wars, they've destroyed Marvel Universe, and they've destroyed all the fairy tales we love by making them, by putting gay people in them and making them lame. And that was the South Park message. All right. Put that in South Park's mouth, not mine. And and they went directly after people of, you know, they named people at Disney who did it, and they went hard, and it hit hard. I mean, they hit the nail on the head pretty much with this episode, right? And it really frustrated Disney. And this week, Disney came out with an SEC filing claiming they're losing money because the values they promote in their content are not the values that their audience wants to hear. And I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't think that SEC filing was going to happen without South Park. You know, this is kind of interesting because
this is related to John Paul II.
Right. Well, what's interesting is when you watch something like that, which you shouldn't because it's very crass, it's South Park. But when you see that, you realize a lot of people realize they're not alone, that what they're annoyed at is in fact not some small minority that's annoyed at this. It's actually everyone's annoyed at this, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes this like moment of solidarity that promotes change.
Yeah.
Right. And people are constantly trying to not allow that solidarity to happen with traditionalist values.
Yeah.
Right. It's
either
like why
by calling them, like either by not recognizing them,
right.
By calling them fringe, by saying, a minority of people on the right or a minority, whatever.
Like when the mass media used to never use the word pro-life.
Yeah.
Or they would act like the pro-life march didn't even exist.
Yeah.
What they were trying to do was not give energy to the movement so that people wouldn't know that they had power or that there were other people who felt like them. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember this, there was a point when Netflix decided they were going to fund all the pro-abortion stuff, like in Georgia, and we canceled our Netflix membership over it, right?
Yeah.
And then, like, a couple months later, the Wall Street Journal has an article that Netflix recorded its first quarterly loss ever, or first decrease in subscriptions ever in a quarter.
Yeah.
And the whole article was about, I guess the time has come that the market's saturated and that Netflix might start losing subscribers.
Right,
but they never mentioned,
They always give you...
Yeah, maybe we weren't alone. Maybe 1 million people felt the way we did and all canceled their Netflix over this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that it's either doesn't acknowledge the thing or they'll say, you might think this very simple, obvious explanation is the reason, but here's some complicated, convoluted reasons that don't make sense.
I was reading stuff on San Francisco store closures, because San Francisco is kind of a disaster right now. And it would be like, okay, this store's closing in San Francisco.
It's because people don't like Old Navy anymore. No, it's because
they're all
people
shopping online is why the store closed. It's not because of crime.
No, it's because people, the Old Navy staff was afraid for their life in San Francisco. Right. Yeah.
How does this relate to JP2? So the interesting story is JP2 visiting Poland during the Cold War. And if you think about this communist country, they're kind of a colony of Russia at this point. And everything that is like mass produced is being controlled. Like the media is being controlled, the paper's being controlled, the messaging's being controlled. And it's all being controlled in a certain communist propaganda angle, which is like, religion is passé, religion is anti-communist. This is the future. We're having great success, even though when you look out your window, you don't see great success, And when JP2 comes to Poland, which was against the wishes of the communists, everyone starts pouring out of these buildings and starts praying together. And it's this moment of people realizing I'm not alone, right? And it's such a threat when this type of stuff happens because it shows people that they're being controlled or that they have power. The proof of the strength of things like the pro-life march is the lengths at which people go to not acknowledge it.
Yeah. Yep. To break the solidarity.
Right. Like if they have to go to great lengths to discredit someone, that's showing how powerful that person's witness is.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that's just kind of interesting, And I think that there's more and more of these solidarity moments happening, and there's more and more like a parallel economy and a parallel, way people are finally using their freedom of speech that's interesting right now.
Yeah.
All right. We're trying to roll right along. Let's get to the shopping carts and moral problems. All right.
Good people put their shopping carts back.
Yes. I literally have read essays, anonymous essays on the internet that you can be a leader if you put your shopping cart back when you go shopping.
I've seen chastisements on Facebook.
Yes.
Of people I thought were cool.
All right. Let's talk about evil people who don't put their shopping cart back. I have a problem that there are certain relationships you enter to that are actual relationships, right? Like you could be going to a mom and pop restaurant, the family, the owner, or what's going on there. You're trying to help them succeed and you're also enjoying the food they serve. And there's this great reciprocal relationship, right? And there's some goodwill there, and it matters. Like they might comp you a meal on your birthday or something. Like there's actual goodwill that matters there. And I would say that's actually a moral relationship. It's a relationship where morality is actually in the relationship, right?
Yeah.
There are also amoral relationships, right? It could be like your relationship with the vending machine. There's just not morality very much in that. I mean, don't steal from the vending machine. But like when you're dealing with a massive corporation, they're doing all types of things to screw with you that are immoral. They're trying to get you to buy things you don't need. They're trying to
manipulate you in from the layout of their store, from their advertising, all of it is like.
Yeah, they're doing everything they can to manipulate you, which is just not moral. It's not like that. They're not being bound by morality at all. And then they want to use this kind of moral social pressure to get you to do certain things. Which would be a completely one-way relationship. It's like, oh, I go out of my way to make sure you're okay, Costco, but you do nothing for me. I actually like Costco, so I don't like using that as an example. But like, this is like an issue. The first time I felt like I ever saw this issue was dealing with people who worked for big employers, who felt like they needed to do a favor to the employer, or felt like they had to work, not ask for the raise, or not leave quickly for the new job because they kind of owed it to the employer. But the employer's like this amoral megalithic company that in a heartbeat would fire that person if they thought it would improve their bottom line. Wouldn't keep them employed an extra day if they thought it would improve their bottom line. Like, has no moral goodwill. And there's nothing by you doing them a favor that you're building up any goodwill with that person. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not against that. Like, to me, that's not like a terrible relationship, but it is completely stupid if you feel like you're doing favors or goodness to this thing that doesn't treat you that way, right? And I just hate this shopping cart problem because it's like, if it's a family grocer putting away your shopping cart to help them out, I'm helping someone out. But if I'm helping out this like amoral entity that's actually exploitive, I'm not trying to hurt them, but I'm not trying to like bring morality into whether or not I do their work for them.
Yeah. I don't think this is your point, but I think it's funny to make this like a moral choice when it's like all these stores literally have someone hired to take care of this problem.
Yeah.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on. I want to keep going. Hold on.
Okay. Laura's on a rant, but she's breaking from her rant to take care of a child. Children come before ranting. Laura's demonstrating this right now.
All right. These stores like literally hire somebody to put your shopping cart away. Maybe not at the mom and pop store. Right. But then the other thing that's funny is like, it's like if you're shopping with a kid, is it safer to walk your kid through the parking lot to get, the shopping cart back? Should you leave your kid alone in the car to get your shopping cart back? And I just feel like this is like a whole performative thing of like, are you a shopping cart putter back or not? But that's my annoyance with it.
You don't have enough real work in your moral life when that's the work you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, Yeah. Yeah.
It's also true. Like I was at this like McDonald's just yesterday trying to just get a black coffee. Right. And there is no one taking orders. You have to go through the kiosk. After I went through the kiosks twice and didn't get what I want, and I saw the price is higher than I wanted, you're being trained to be the checkout person, which whatever, if they're providing great value, I'll get trained to be the checkout person. But then you're just like, I was just like, forget this, walked out, I mean, it's just like,
it's like not even working though. Yeah.
All right. Wait. That is the Simpleton Podcast. All the cutting edge matters that matter, I guess. Anyway, God bless everybody. Please give us feedback. Right. We love getting letters. Like, subscribe, share, however that works. Goodbye, Laura Heeman.
See you later, Clark Massey.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.